In March 1986 in Omaha, Nebraska, an 11-year-old boy was abducted and later discovered murdered. The 11-year-old boy was Richard Frank Ricky Chadek III from Omaha, Nebraska. On Sunday, March 23, 1986, Ricky Chadek left his friend's home on a bike and drove by a bank parking lot in South Omaha. He was then abducted from the parking lot and was last seen around 5:30 p.m. on the same day talking to a man by a blue truck at the location. Time passed and Ricky did not come home, so Ricky's mom drove around the block and down the street to the bank at the corner of 42nd and Valley when she saw Ricky's bike between a dumpster and a wooden enclosure. She said she knew something was wrong at that point. She got out of her car and started yelling to no response, and then went back home and called the police. 11-year-old Ricky Chadek was described as being 4 feet, 3 inches tall, weighing 75 pounds with light brown hair. He was last seen wearing brown glasses, a camouflage shirt, pants and hat, and a blue jacket vest with red and white trim. He wore maroon sneakers. Ricky's mom said he had a fascination with bank ATM machines, and around the time of his disappearance, he begged his mother to let him ride home alone just this one time on his bike, which was a 20-minute distance away from their home. Ricky called his mom around 5 p.m. and said he was on his way home and never arrived. When Ricky was still considered missing, the police said they have no idea if Ricky's disappearance has any connection to the 2 missing paperboys, Eugene Martin and Johnny Gosch. 13-year-old paperboy Eugene Martin disappeared on August 12, 1984 whilst delivering papers in Des Moines, Iowa, and 2 years before Eugene went missing, 12-year-old paperboy Johnny Gosch disappeared on September 5, 1982 in similar circumstances also in Des Moines, Iowa. 8 days later, on Monday, the 31st of March, 1986, Ricky's body was found down an embankment near 168th and Ida Street. His hair, clothing, and body were all clean. On Tuesday, April 1st, 1986, in a news conference held in the backyard of Ricky's home, Ricky's grandfather, Richard Chamberlain, claimed the witness, who was a Jehovah's Witness, was holding information back, and the witness's pastor told him, "Don't cooperate with the FBI because when they get into your mind, so will the devil." Ricky's grandfather claimed the witness could probably help with the license plate information of the truck he saw. Police later claimed information was not withheld and information was revealed about a man seen driving a pickup truck in the parking lot on Sunday, March 23rd around 5:30 p.m. Ricky is believed to have approached the truck and spoke to the man according to the witness report. Police revealed the sketch of the man with a baseball cap seen in the bank parking lot. The man was described as being white, between the ages of 45 to 50, with dark hair and a reddish complexion. They also described the truck as being blue and possibly being a 1968 to 1972 Chevrolet or GMC pickup with matching blue wooden sideboards. The police said the truck may have had Iowa license plates. Leonard Parkening, a farmer who found Ricky's body, said he was with his son plowing a field along 168th Street around 11:40 a.m. when he noticed a red object among the trees and bushes in a ditch. When Leonard Parkening drove home for lunch, Parkening said he and his son drove to where he had saw the red object, and as they got to the spot, they saw a book bag lying by the red object. Parkening then saw Ricky and recognized him because of his jacket. Parkening said there was no sign of wounds or blood. No effort was made to conceal his body. He said the book bag was about 3 feet from the body. The autopsy revealed Richard Chadek III had died of traumatic asphyxia, possibly caused by strangulation or smothering. Detectives believed Ricky was cared for, kept alive, and even fed for at least 7 days. Food was found in Ricky's digestive tract. Douglas County Sheriff's Office investigator and polygraph examiner John Panconen said it looked like he was fed possibly a good meal, a good Easter meal, or just before Easter. He said the food looked like some ham that had been fried because of the burnt edges, and corn, celery, and potatoes were also visible. A couple of days after Ricky was found, students at Beals Elementary School tried returning to normalcy. Richard Chadek was a fourth grader at the school. On Friday, April 4th, 1986, a fictitious report was made regarding a possible abduction which occurred at 25th and Farnham Streets on Thursday night, the day before. The woman who made the report later confessed that she made up the story. On the same day, on Friday, April 4th, 1986, the funeral mass at St. Thomas More Catholic Church occurred, and hundreds of people attended, including some students and faculty from Beals Elementary School. Richard Frank Chadek III was buried in Evergreen Memorial Park. On April 10, 1986, Omaha Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat said that rumors of an arrest in the abduction and death of 11-year-old Ricky Chadek were false. Mohat said a number of callers told police they had heard about the arrest from friends. The callers said they heard the arrest reportedly came after police received information that the man had recently sold a newly painted pickup truck to an Elkhorn man. The caller said the Elkhorn man notified authorities after he discovered the truck had been painted white but was originally blue. The man who sold the truck, according to the story, was then arrested. 2 weeks after Ricky Chadek was found murdered, Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat said that since the discovery of Richard's body, the task force assigned to the case had grown, and 59 investigators from 9 area law enforcement agencies were involved. Police were focusing most of their attention on finding the blue pickup truck and its driver, which police said was their only solid lead. Mohat said more than 1,000 trucks in Nebraska and Iowa have been checked and cleared. Investigators had traveled as far as 300 miles to check leads, he said. Mohat said the police have questioned several possible suspects, but an arrest is not imminent. By mid-April 1986, the investigators developed an abduction plan, and the FBI was still helping the investigation. The toxicology report showed Richard Chadek had no drugs in his system, and he was also not sexually assaulted, according to the autopsy report. On May 2, 1986, another report of a possible child abduction occurred, which was based on a mistaken interpretation of events by a witness. On October 20, 1986, it was reported that a 9-year police chief named Frank Vondra of Bennington, a town of about 700 northwest of Omaha, had been working since April on the Richard Chadek case for no pay. Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat described him as a godsend. On the 21st of November 1986, the Omaha World Herald reported that investigators used a computer which helped solve a Sarpy County case, which was an abduction murder of a boy. Thousands of names were fed into the computer, and the terminal screen showed the number was reduced to 300 hits, including the suspect who eventually pled guilty to the crime. The investigators in the Richard Chadek case used this new computer to track all blue Ford and Chevrolet pickup trucks, which the system produced in 20 minutes. A task which required most of the morning around the time of Richard's disappearance in March. It was December 1986, and the mother of Richard, Teresa Chadek, was still struggling with the loss of her son, and his case was still unsolved nearing Christmas. Teresa said she decided not to put up a Christmas tree or decorations that year because it would remind her too much of her son. On the 23rd of March, 1987, it was reported by the Omaha World Herald that a year after Richard Chadek III's disappearance, the investigation into his murder looked no closer to finding a solution. The task force of local, state, and federal law enforcement officers had spent countless hours checking more than 3,200 leads, but the Omaha police detectives, who were now handling the case, said they're no closer to identifying the killer or motive than they were the day Richard's body was found. On Thursday, September 10, 1987, two police officers went to a sex offender's home on California Street in Omaha to arrest them on a warrant charging the individual with felony sexual assault of a child. The sex offender was 52-year-old Charles Laverne Miller, a local handyman with a strong interest in firearms. After Charles Miller saw the officers, he ran into the home and a 36-hour standoff occurred, with the SWAT team getting involved with 25 officers at the scene. Charles Miller was eventually apprehended and taken into custody the next day on Friday night. A property manager who employed Charles Miller, who had known Charles for 10 years, said he was very good as a handyman and was always on time. The property manager also told a reporter that Miller seemed to have many boys of the wrong age in his company. In 1976, Charles Laverne Miller was convicted of 2 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor in 1976 in Douglas County District Court. Miller was arrested after a boy told deputy sheriffs he and 2 other youths had been to a marijuana party at the California Street home where they watched pornographic movies. Deputies went to the house with a search warrant and found several bags of marijuana and 34 movies that the deputies described as pornographic. The boy who went to the police said Miller has regular parties with boys at his home and offers them to smoke marijuana and watch films. After the films are viewed, Miller requests that the participants who watch the movies with him at his home disrobe in hopes of committing a homosexual act. The then District Judge Samuel Caniglia fined Miller $1,000 and placed him on probation. Lack of previous criminal records saved him from a jail term, the judge said. On the day Charles Miller was taken into custody, his pastor, Reverend Ralph Baker of the Gospel Satellite Church where Charles attended, said Miller had been questioned during the Chadek investigation and said Miller told him on telephone on the day the police showed up with an arrest warrant that he was under great pressure since the earlier questioning. Barker said Miller told him he planned to kill himself because he couldn't stand the pressure anymore. Reverend Ralph Barker told police that Miller was a possible suspect in the Chadek case. Barker said to reporters that he talked to police after learning of Miller's alleged sexual activities with teenage boys. Barker also claimed his son went to Omaha police around September 1st and told homicide detectives James Wilson and Paul Breeze that some boys told his father about Miller's alleged contact with 4 boys in Saunders County at Miller's farm in Weston, Nebraska. Barker said Wilson and Breeze interviewed him soon afterward at one of the 2 odd lot stores that he owns. He said he told the detectives the boys had reported to him that Miller owned 2 blue pickup trucks and that he thought he had seen Miller drive one of the trucks past a television camera, videotaping the events at the scene where the Chadek boy's body was found. Deputy Chief James Skinner contradicted the Reverend's statement and said Miller had not previously been questioned by Omaha police in the Chadek death. He said police have no direct evidence to link Miller to the boy's murder. He said, however, that the police questioned many people with a history of sexual offenses involving minors. On Wednesday, September 16, 1987, after information was given to Saunders County Attorney Lauren Lindahl the day before from an investigation of Miller by Omaha police and the Douglas County Attorney's Office, Charles Laverne Miller was charged with 2 counts of sexual assault and 2 counts of felony sexual assault on a child. A Saunders County judge ordered Charles Laverne Miller to stand trial on charges of sexually assaulting 4 teenage boys at his farm near Weston, Nebraska. During the court appearance in Wahoo, Nebraska, Miller gave up his right to a preliminary hearing and was ordered to stand trial by Saunders County Judge Everett O. Inbody. Inbody set bail on the charges at $200,000, and Miller would have to post at least 10% of that to be released. Charles Miller was already facing 1 felony sex charge in Douglas County. Attorney Lauren Lindahl said a warrant was issued for Miller's arrest on the new charges so that Miller could appear in court. Miller had not posted bail on the Douglas County charge before being transported to Wahoo. The victims in the Saunders County charges were a 17-year-old boy and two 13-year-old boys who had previously stayed with him and helped out on his farm. The victim in the Douglas County case was 14 years old, who had also stayed with him at his farm in Weston, Nebraska. On September 18, 1987, Charles Laverne Miller was released from custody after posting $20,000, 10% of the $200,000 bail, to get out of jail. It was also reported that Miller had mistakenly been charged with the same alleged sexual assault in both Douglas and Saunders counties. On the 21st of September 1987, it was reported by the Omaha World-Herald that Charles Laverne Miller failed 2 polygraph examinations that Omaha police gave him after they took him into custody on the 11th of September 1987, which a law enforcement personnel close to the investigation had told them on Monday, the 21st. Miller's attorney, J. William Gallup, said Charles Miller had taken a polygraph exam and had been cleared of the Chadek matter. On Monday, October 5, 1987, at Miller's arraignment in Saunders County District Court, he pleaded not guilty to the sexual assault charges. On Monday, December 21, 1987, at Saunders County District Court, Charles Miller pled no contest to 2 of the more serious charges of the 4 he was charged with in a plea agreement, and the lesser 2 of the 4 sexual assault charges filed in Saunders County would be dropped as part of the deal. Douglas County Attorney Ronald Staskiewicz had said he would drop the Douglas County charge against Miller if Miller would plead guilty to 2 similar charges he faced in Saunders County. Miller's sentencing hearing for his 2 felony-degree sexual assault charges was scheduled for January 25, 1988. On Monday, January 25, 1988, at Saunders County District Court, at Miller's sentencing hearing, he was sentenced to 15 to 25 years in prison on each of the 2 felony first-degree sexual assault charges. Charles Miller, who was 52 in January 1988, began serving his sentence while receiving psychiatric treatment at the Lincoln Regional Center until he was considered mentally fit. Charles Miller ended up serving 12 years in prison and was released on November 24, 2000, after being eligible for parole on May 24, 1998. On Thursday, December 29, 2005, pedophile Charles Laverne Miller, now 70, was arrested after a search warrant was served at his home in Weston, Nebraska. Charles Miller was charged in Saunders County Court with first-degree sexual assault of a minor. The victim was a developmentally disabled 17-year-old boy from Beatrice, Nebraska. The teen had been staying at his residence since early September 2005. An 11-year-old boy from Bluffs also was staying at Miller's residence. Both boys were taken into protective custody. Charles Miller was found unconscious after officers arrived with the search warrant from an overdose of medications in an apparent suicide attempt. For several hours, deputies had knocked on his door in an attempt to speak with him. Miller was taken to Creighton Medical Center for treatment. On Monday, the 13th of November 2006, 71-year-old Charles Laverne Miller was sentenced to a term of 40 to 50 years in prison after he pled guilty to 1 count of first-degree sexual assault. He would have to serve a minimum of 20 years before he is eligible for parole. Miller was a diagnosed pedophile and had been under psychiatric treatment for many years, and he befriended the victim's family in order to get to him. His victim lived 75 miles away. In court, he read out writing from a piece of paper claiming he had extreme regret to all the persons involved because of his inexcusable behavior. Miller said he accepted full responsibility. Charles Laverne Miller eventually died in prison in 2014 at the age of 78 years old. In May 1988, Teresa Chadek helped with a petition and collected 2,790 signatures in an attempt to change both city and state laws in Nebraska in regards to tougher laws on child enticement to protect children. It was March 23, 1989, and 3 years had passed since Richard Chadek's abduction and murder, and his mother, Teresa Chadek, said she still cannot bring herself to forgive the person responsible. On Tuesday, October 31, 1989, an agent with the FBI office in Omaha made a statement claiming that there's nothing to indicate a connection between the October 22, 1989 abduction of 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling near St. Joseph, Minnesota, and the 1986 abduction and death of 11-year-old Omaha boy Richard Chadek. The agent also said that there's no indication the previous disappearances of the two Des Moines paperboys, 12-year-old Johnny Gosch in 1982 and 13-year-old Eugene Martin in 1984, were connected either. In December 1991, it was reported that a person in Arkansas, whom Omaha homicide detectives believed could have been the suspect in the 1986 abduction and slaying of 11-year-old Richard Chadek, apparently had no part in the crime. Sergeant Cates said the detectives had received information about a suspect in an Arkansas crime who appeared to match the description of the suspect in the Chadek murder. Detective Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat said the man had lived in Omaha for 2 years and lived in Omaha when Ricky Chadek was killed. The man was suspected in the abduction and sexual assault of a child in Arkansas. In May 1993, detectives from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office and the Omaha Police Department went to Albuquerque, New Mexico to question a Roman Catholic priest in connection with the 1986 abduction and murder of 11-year-old Richard Chadek. Omaha Police Captain Michael Flaharty said that the priest moved from Omaha to Albuquerque in 1988 before detectives had the opportunity to question him in depth about the Chadek case. Flaharty would not identify the man and/or be specific about the investigation. Flaharty said it should not be interpreted as an imminent break in the case. The Roman Catholic priest was one of 9 men arrested during an investigation into male prostitution by Omaha police in August 1988. 10 years later, in March 1996, the case still remained unsolved, and the main investigator on the case, Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat, had since retired. Mohat said he thinks about the case every time he sees an old blue pickup truck. Mohat claimed investigators had so many leads and nothing seemed to pan out. He claimed the investigation was incomplete and certain possible suspects were not cleared. A plaque outside the bank where Ricky disappeared was put there in memory. Police also were left wondering about an anonymous call made to the homicide unit on December 10, 1986, mere months after Ricky's death. A male voice asked if we ever considered the possibility that Richard's death was an accident, said Lieutenant John Lahachek, who then was a homicide sergeant who answered the call. Lieutenant Lahachek wanted to talk to the man more, but within seconds he hung up. The man in the cap, described as a white male between 45 and 50 with a reddish complexion who drove the blue pickup truck, had still not been caught after 10 years. Time passed and a breakthrough was still needed in the case. On February 23, 1997, the Omaha World Herald released an article with the title, "Most Often Children Know Their Abductors." Other child abduction cases were mentioned in the article, such as the Colin Gill, Sierra O'Connell, and the Johnny Gosch case. On Tuesday, the 11th of January in the year 2000, 61-year-old retired Police Lieutenant Tony Mohat passed away of cancer at the Bergen Mercy Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska. At the time of Ricky Chadek's murder, Tony Mohat was head of the Omaha Police Department's Youth Services Division, which handled crimes against children. He took over as head of the homicide unit in 1989 and retired from the police in 1992. On the 18th of March 2003, the Omaha World Herald reported in an article that Ricky Chadek's grandfather, Robert H. Chamberlain, had passed away. Robert was a Korean War veteran and was a detective, a field sergeant, a dog handler, and the captain of the shooting team for the Omaha Police Department for 29 years after he joined the police in 1956. In May 2006, a training session occurred with 19 law enforcement agencies from eastern Nebraska and western Iowa in attendance for a Child is Missing phone notification system which 39 other states were using to help get the word out about missing persons. Douglas County Sheriff Tim Dunning said the system could have helped in the 1986 abduction and murder of 11-year-old Richard Chadek. On May 28, 2006, the Omaha World-Herald released an article about the contrasting differences between the investigation into the abduction and murder of 12-year-old Amber Harris and 11-year-old Richard Chadek. Amber Harris was found 5 months after she disappeared, and her case was later eventually solved. In March 2011, investigators revealed DNA evidence has helped them eliminate some suspects in the 1986 killing of Ricky Chadek. Investigators received a DNA profile of the killer after new testing was done on existing evidence. Lieutenant Mark Gentile of the Douglas County Sheriff's Office said that investigators are trying to match the profile to suspects identified over the years. Gentile said a DNA sample was taken from 2 women and other blood relatives to rule out that the tested evidence came from a family member. On September 6, 2016, whilst on trial on child sexual abuse material charges, 52-year-old Danny James Heinrich, a man who was a suspect in the sexual assault and abduction crime of 12-year-old Jared Shirel and the abduction murder of 11-year-old Jacob Wetterling, confessed to both crimes in the courtroom. Danny Heinrich was publicly named as a person of interest in Jacob Wetterling's disappearance in October 2015. The FBI questioned him on December 16, 1989, in regards to Jacob's case, and his DNA was taken. He was not charged with a crime and was released. Danny Heinrich cooperated with authorities as part of a plea bargain, and on September 1, 2016, led investigators to a burial site. Jacob's clothing and human remains were unearthed from a pasture near Paynesville, about 30 miles away from the Wetterling home and the abduction site, and a short distance from where Heinrich was living in 1989. In the plea agreement, Heinrich agreed to plead guilty to 1 count of the 25 federal child sexual abuse material charges brought against him. In addition to revealing the location of the body and pleading guilty, he also agreed to testify as to the details of the Wetterling crime. He was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years in federal prison, and because of details in the plea agreement, he may never be allowed to be free from prison. In September 2016, after Jacob Wetterling's abduction murder case ended up being solved, investigators had hope that possibly the 1986 abduction murder cold case of Ricky Chadek would also eventually be solved.
It gives you hope that, look, these guys did it, so can we.
Douglas County Sheriff Tim Dunning wants to keep this cold case as warm as he can. The kidnapping and killing of Ricky Chadek happened when Dunning was raising children of his own.
It does hit home so that when you go home, you appreciate your kids a lot more.
Last week, an 11-year-old boy named Jacob Wetterling was kidnapped from the streets of St. Joseph, Minnesota.
In Minnesota, closing a 1989 cold case came with pain for Jacob Wetterling's mother.
I want to say, Jacob, I'm so sorry. It's incredibly painful to know his last days, last hours, last minutes.
Danny Heinrich described his crime, how he cornered Wetterling along with the boy's younger brother and best friend, how he singled out and cuffed Jacob in his car, who asked, "What did I do wrong?" The killer says he drove the boy to a secluded spot where he molested him before shooting him twice with a revolver.
I wonder who did it. When's it going to get solved?
Ricky Chadek's uncle spoke with us in March. Like the Wetterlings, he too wants answers.
What did he go through? What happened to him in that time?
I love my son, and I want him home. I want him home for Easter.
Closure came on Easter in 1986 with terrible news. Chadek's body found strangled near 168th and Ida. Still, the biggest mystery remains unsolved. Who killed him and why?
We'll just keep going back over this case, and hopefully we'll find something, or somebody will come forward, and we'll eventually solve it.
In May 2021, 35 years after 11-year-old Richard Chadek was found murdered, detectives took another look at the evidence to help bring his killer to justice. Sergeant John Panconen, who works for the Douglas County Sheriff's Office, talked to a WOW-T News reporter and discussed the DNA, which was hair follicles acquired from the crime scene. He hoped that some closure could be brought to Ricky Chadek's family, especially for his mother, Teresa.
Detectives found physical evidence at the scene.
We recovered some hair follicles.
That evidence submitted for testing, but what returned was only a partial DNA profile, not enough to enter it into the National DNA Database. Fast forward 35 years, police are now turning to a private company to take a second look.
Right now, that's what we are doing, is we're looking to see if we can progress this case further, possibly through genetic genealogy.